The lucky ones died on E-Day. What does it take for a civilization to look at the massacre of billions and envy the dead? What unimaginable horrors must follow to make the total collapse of the world seem like a mercy? Sera was a world destined for tragedy, a planet appropriately named after the ancient god of war, Ares. For nearly a century, its surface was a canvas of constant, uninterrupted bloodshed. Entire generations were born, raised, and buried under the shadow of a rifle. But the true enemy was never across the battlefield. The true enemy was waiting beneath their boots. For 79 agonizing years, humanity tore itself apart in a global conflict known as the Pendulum Wars. The coalition of ordered governments, the COG, waged an endless campaign against the Union of Independent Republics, the UIR. The prize they bled for was emulsion. It was a naturally occurring, luminescent, highly volatile liquid. Found deep within the subterranean networks of Sera, humanity quickly learned to refine this glowing fluid into a limitless fuel source. It was the ultimate treasure, a golden promise of endless power, and humans, as they always do, went to war over it. Millions perished in the mud and the trenches. The sky grew thick with the smoke of industry and war. Yet, the hunger for emulsion brought a far darker consequence. A consequence hidden in the shadows of classified government files. The constant exposure to this parasitic fungal organism began to poison the very miners who extracted it. It manifested as a slow, fatal respiratory disease known as Rustlung. The COG, under the administration of Chairman Monroe, sought a cure. They opened the New Hope Research Facility, placing Director Niles Sampson in charge. But science, when untethered from morality, quickly descends into madness. Sampson did not just study the disease, he studied the innocent. He experimented on the children of the emulsion-poisoned miners. Among these children was a young girl named Mira. She was an anomaly. Genetically immune to the devastating effects of emulsion, her body actually benefited from the exposure, granting her a highly responsive immune system and a decelerated aging process. Sampson became obsessed with her perfection. He attempted to replicate her gifts in the others. In his dark, sterile laboratories, children were subjected to agonizing transgenic experiments. Their DNA was spliced with the indigenous, monstrous creatures of the Deep Hollow. The result? Feral, aggressive chimeras known as the Sires. They were abominations. When the unethical horrors of New Hope threatened to leak to the public, the facility was ordered to shut down by the chairman. But a shadow faction within the government saw potential where others saw horror. They saw an army of enhanced soldiers. Sampson and his subjects were quietly relocated to a hidden laboratory deep within the underground caves of Mount Kadar. It was there, in the pitch black of the abyss, that the Locust Horde was born. Mira's embryonic stem cells were combined with the mutated DNA of the sires, creating the very first Locust hybrids. They were highly controllable, the perfect soldiers. They possessed a powerful hive mind, a collective consciousness, and Mira was their nexus. She was their voice. She was their mother. Time is a cruel architect. Mira eventually conceived a human daughter, Reina, with a geneticist named Dr. Torres. Fearing for his child's life in that subterranean prison of science, Torres fled with the infant. Sampson, desperate to maintain his control over his most valuable subject, lied to Mira. He looked into her eyes and told her the child was killed during the escape. Grief is a powerful catalyst. Grief mixed with absolute power creates empires. Heartbroken and enraged, Mira embraced her destiny. She assumed her place as queen of the Locust Horde. She commanded her children to rise up, slaughtering the scientists who had tormented them for so long. The Locust escaped deeper into the uncharted caverns of Mount Kadar, carving out their own independence. In the dark, they built a vast subterranean civilization. They constructed their magnificent capital city of Nexus, far from the ignorant eyes of humanity. They were free. But peace in the Hollow was nothing more than an illusion. While humanity waged the endless pendulum wars on the surface, a new terror awoke below. By the year 7 BE, 7 years before Emergence Day, an epidemic swept through the inner hollow. The emulsion that ran through the veins of Sera was mutating. Locust citizens began falling to a terrifying parasitic disease called lambency. The infected were possessed, their bodies twisted and mutated, their minds completely erased. They became semi-sentient monsters with a singular, horrifying goal: to kill or infect all living, non-affected organisms around them. The lambent war had begun. War. Queen Mira watched her people die in the dark. Her hatred for humanity festered. She despised them for imprisoning her kind, for torturing them, for driving them underground, and for the supposed murder of her infant daughter. Yet out of sheer desperation to save her race from extinction, she reached out. In the year 5 BE, she met with the brilliant human scientist, Professor Adam Phoenix. She revealed the existence of the Horde and the encroaching lambent threat. She struck a desperate deal. Phoenix would find a cure for lambency, allowing the Locust to remain safely underground. If he failed, the Locust would have no choice but to colonize the surface. Adam Phoenix tried. He studied the infection. He discovered that nearly all biological cures failed against the relentless lambent mutagen. Worse still, any physical measure strong enough to kill the lambent would also exterminate the Locust Horde itself. There was no cure. There was no hope in science. Instead of saving the Locust, Adam Phoenix was called away by the COG. He was tasked with completing a weapon of mass destruction to end the human conflict, the Hammer of Dawn. He succeeded. The orbital laser rained divine fire upon the UIR, forcing their unconditional surrender. After 79 years, humanity finally knew peace. The treaty was signed. Celebrations erupted across the cities of Sera. Elaborate parades filled the streets with music and laughter. The war was over. But Queen Mira had lost her patience. She had lost faith in Adam Phoenix. The Locust were losing ground, dying at the hands of the lambent. A brilliant, ruthless Locust commander named General Ram staged a coup, taking control of the Horde's military might. He had visited the surface. He had seen humans fighting each other for resources, a flaw he found utterly disgusting. He convinced his queen that the surface was their only salvation. They would not ask for humanity's permission. They would not share. They would simply take their world. For 6 weeks, humanity celebrated their fragile, beautiful peace. 6 short weeks of quiet before the storm. Did they not notice the signs? How blind can a species be? In the days leading up to the end, an epidemic of strange earthquakes and deep rhythmic tremors echoed across Sera. Scientists were puzzled, scrambling for geological explanations. Journalists debated the cause on the evening news. No one understood that the ground beneath their feet was being systematically hollowed out. They were too busy looking at the sky. They forgot to look down. The silence of the surface. How does a civilization react when its entire reality fractures in 26 hours? When the first reports fractured the morning radio stations, the word monsters felt like an error, a glitch in the system. Initial news reports spoke of massive gray figures rising from jagged tears in the asphalt. Witnesses stammered. The press, overwhelmed and trembling, asked if this was the end of the world. But humanity had just spent 80 years perfecting the art of denial. In the early hours of that long night, millions chose to believe a comforting lie. They told themselves it was an elaborate hoax. a viral marketing stunt for some upcoming science fiction film. Others, looking at the smoke rising from the military bases, whispered that the Union of Independent Republics had broken the treaty. They thought the Gorazni were attacking. They prepared for a war they understood. They were entirely unprepared for a war of extermination. Chairman Thomas Dalyell's voice finally cut through the panic. It was a broadcast stripped of hope. He confessed that the enemy was not human. He told a terrified planet that things were tunneling beneath their homes, emerging through the floorboards to slaughter without distinction. He begged them to stay indoors. He told them the military had things under control. It was a beautiful, hollow promise. No one had control. The Locust Horde moved with a terrifying textbook precision. This wasn't a chaotic migration of subterranean beasts. It was a disciplined military invasion. General Raim and Countess Scourge had structured the assault to paralyze the world's heartstrings. They targeted the communication nodes, the transportation lines, the military strongholds. Can you hear the sound of a city losing its voice? Within hours, the global communications network crashed. The COG Civil Protection Service ceased to exist. Phone lines went dead, plunging entire continents into a suffocating, terrifying silence that would last for weeks. Neighbors could not call neighbors. Parents could not check on their children. The world became a collection of isolated islands, waiting in the dark for the sound of scratching beneath the stone. The hospitals were the first to fall. In every major city outside the granite shield of the Jacinto Plateau, the wounded arrived in tides. Millions of men, women, and children torn by serrated blades and heavy lead. The medical staff, lacking supplies, lacking power, were forced to turn people away. They locked the doors against the dying. On the tracks, the massive trains stopped. In the skies, civilian air traffic was grounded forever. The great human machine of Sera, which had survived nearly a century of global warfare, was brought to a dead halt in a single solar cycle, and then the massacres became systematic. In Jannermont, a city proud of its massive military base, the death toll reached 100,000 before noon. The Locusts did not take land. They took lives. The highway out of the city became a linear graveyard, filled with thousands of burning cars and the cold bodies of those who thought they could outrun the earth. The images, captured by a few surviving automated cameras, played on a loop on the few screens left flickering. But death on the surface was only the first layer of the nightmare. What is worse than dying in the light? It is being dragged into the dark. Millions of citizens were not killed. They were recorded as missing. The early rumors whispered that the Locusts were eating the survivors. The truth was far more calculated, far more sinister. The Horde needed labor. They needed materials. They needed flesh. Millions were dragged down into the humid, sulfurous depths of the hollow. Human hands that once painted canvases or guided ships were forced to dig trenches for their captors, working until their bones splintered. They were fed to the massive blood mounts when their strength failed. And for the rest, there was Sukun. The Locust geneticist viewed human biology not with hatred, but as raw resource. In his deep, damp laboratories, the captured were subjected to a horrific ritual known as processing. It was a systematic dismantling of the human soul. Through torture, chemical manipulation, and crude surgery, men and women were lobotomized. Their bodies were altered. Their minds were rewired into the hive mind. They were turned into drones. Imagine marching back into your own hometown, holding a weapon, your mind erased, forced to slaughter the people you loved, wearing the pallid skin of the enemy. On the surface, the remnants of humanity began to break. In Hanover, a city spared the initial assault due to its geography. The government attempted to force normalcy. Daliel ordered the Cougars to play their scheduled thrashball game to preserve morale. But Augustus Cole looked at the uniform. He looked at the stadium lights. He thought of his parents, somewhere out in the smoking wastes, missing. He realized the game was over. He walked away from the stadium and joined the Gears. He chose to trade his pads for a heavy breastplate, understanding that the only thing left to play for was time. The weapons of the humans were old relics of a different era. The Lancer K1, with its long steel bayonet, was a weapon made to pierce human flesh. Against the dense, calcified muscle of the Locust drones, the blades snapped. The soldiers fought with broken steel and blunt force, losing ground step by bloody step. It would take a year of slaughter and the desperate observation of a soldier named Ty Caliso using a power saw in the trenches for Adam Phoenix to finally build the chainsaw bayonet. But on E-Day, there were no chainsaws. There was only the sound of metal scraping against bone and the laughter of the Horde. By the time the 26 hours ended, 25% of humanity was gone. Billions of voices silenced. The grand cathedrals, the libraries of the UIR, the great monuments of Ephora, all lay fractured, filled with ash. The survivors looked at the sky, thick with the black soot of burning oil, and they realized something terrifying. The old calendar was useless. The years they had spent counting their progress meant nothing. They threw away the old world. They established Year Zero. And in the silence of the new era, a bitter saying began to spread among the refugees shivering in the camps. The lucky ones died on E-Day. The surface of Sera is quiet now, buried under a blanket of dust and gray ash. The true war for survival is about to begin. The first 26 hours of the Emergence were not a battle. They were an execution. The human race, comfortable in its freshly signed treaties and grand victory parades, was completely dismantled. The surprise was absolute. The dominance was total. As the sun began to set on that horrific first day, the true scale of General Aram's strategy became visual. The Locust Horde did not just want to kill. They wanted to conquer. They wanted to erase the very memory of the surface. How does an army of monsters achieve a flawless military invasion in a single afternoon? The answer lay in the sky. In the cities where the human military attempted to gather, the Locust deployed massive subterranean creatures known as cedars. These beasts did not fire bullets. They vomited a thick, foul substance into the atmosphere, a biological ink that spread across the clouds, blotting out the natural light of the sun. With the light gone, the sky belonged to the nemesists and the krill storms. Countless carnivorous, nocturnal bioweapons swarmed the darkened streets in broad daylight, shredding anyone who stepped outside of cover. The human soldiers were trapped. They could not move. They could not retreat. They could only watch as the gray tide pushed deeper into their neighborhoods. The response from the coalition of ordered governments was born out of complete and utter panic. The global communications network was entirely dead. The civil protection services had vanished. Chairman Tomas Daliel, operating from the fortified government sectors, ordered a total mobilization of every available human asset. The 25th Sheriff Cavalry, along with thousands of other soldiers who had just been granted leave to see their families, were violently recalled to active duty. They were thrown into the streets without a plan, without intel, and with weapons that were completely useless against the enemy. What happens when your best weapons are meant for an enemy that no longer exists? The Gears fought with the Lancer Mk1, the Retro Lancer. Its traditional steel bayonet was designed to pierce the cloth uniforms of UIR soldiers. But when the humans charged the Locust drones, the metal blades bent and snapped against thick, calcified hide and living metal armor. The soldiers were forced into desperate, brutal hand-to-hand combat against creatures that possessed twice their strength and an unquenchable thirst for blood. In the city of Ephera, the proud capital of the COG, the ground literally split open. Because Ephera sat upon natural fissures, subways, and an intricate sewage network, the Locusts did not even need to dig. They simply walked up from the dark, emerging directly inside government buildings, homes, and military outposts. The command gave a desperate order: fill the access points with gas and cement. Pour concrete into the subways. Seal the tunnels, even if there are human survivors still hiding inside them. It was a ruthless tactic, but it worked. The granite plateau of Jacinto held. For a brief moment, the capital was spared from total eradication, but the rest of the planet was burning. Can a civilization survive when its limbs are severed, leaving only the heart beating in a cage of stone? By the second day, the global infrastructure was completely paralyzed. The railways were shuttered. Civilian air traffic was permanently grounded. The hospitals, drowning in blood, began turning away the mutilated survivors. There were no more beds. There was no more medicine. Millions of citizens were missing. The government told the public to remain calm, to stay inside their homes, promising that the military had the situation under control. But the civilians knew it was a lie. They locked their doors and listened to the rhythmic, heavy thudding of the locust boots on the pavement outside. And then came the darkness of the aftermath. The immediate repercussions of that single day changed the identity of the universe forever. Emergence Day became the absolute center of human history, the exact point where the old world died and a nightmare was born. The old calendar system, which had measured human progress for centuries, was completely destroyed. The governments abolished it. Time was reset to year zero. From that day forward, every event, every birth, and every death would be measured by its distance from the horror. BE, before emergence, and AE, after emergence. The human race admitted that their history had ended, and their survival was now a daily lottery. But the long-term scar on human culture was devastating. The loss of 25% of the species in less than 30 hours created a collective trauma that broke the human spirit. People no longer feared death, they feared survival. A bitter, quiet phrase was born in the refugee camps and whispered in the dark corners of the remaining fortified cities. The lucky ones died on E-Day, because those who died in the initial attack did not have to see what Sera would become. They did not have to see the sky turn permanently gray from the ash of orbital lasers. They did not have to experience the processing camps of Ukon or the endless winter of sorrow that was waiting in the years ahead. The political landscape was shattered beyond repair. Daliel's heart would eventually fail under the immense stress of the war, leading to the rise of Richard Prescott, a leader who would look at the data of Emergence Day and realize that to defeat an enemy from the underground, humanity would have to burn its own surface to ash using the Hammer of Dawn. The Fortification Act was born directly from the failures of E-Day, a policy that would destroy human history just to deny assets to the Horde. The Locust had proven that the surface was no longer a home. It was a hunting ground, and the human race was running out of places to hide. The dust of Emergence Day never truly settled. It simply became the air that humanity was forced to breathe. When the first 26 hours of the invasion came to an end, the human race did not celebrate its survival. They looked at the horizon and realized that the world they had spent centuries building was gone, replaced by a silent, smoldering graveyard. The immediate shock of the attack dissipated, leaving behind a cold, permanent scar on the history of Sera. How do you measure time when tomorrow is no longer a promise? The most immediate and profound repercussion of that dark day was the absolute destruction of human culture. The leaders of the coalition of ordered governments looked at the ruins of their civilization and understood that the past was a luxury they could no longer afford. By official decree, the ancient calendar system, the one that had recorded their golden age of technology, their art, and their triumphs, was abolished forever. Time itself was violently reset to year zero. Every event, every birth, and every tragic death would now be categorized as either BE, before emergence, or AE, after emergence. The human race openly admitted that their true history had ended, and they were now living in a dark, uncertain prologue to their own extinction. But the psychological scar ran even deeper than the calendar. The loss of a quarter of the entire human population in a single day left a void that could never be filled. The survivors were crowded into filthy, cold refugee camps or trapped within the few fortified zones like Ephora, their minds shattered by what they had witnessed. It was in these quiet, desperate places that the bitter mantra was born. The lucky ones died on E-Day. It was not a phrase of surrender. It was a statement of cold fact. Those who perished in the initial onslaught were spared the agonizing decades of starvation, fear, and hopelessness that lay ahead for the living. What is the value of life when every breath is an act of desperation? The political repercussions changed the nature of human governance forever. The fragile global peace that had lasted a mere 6 weeks was completely vaporized. The nations of Sera, already weak and hollowed out by 79 years of the pendulum wars, collapsed completely. The structures of democracy and sovereign states disappeared, replaced by a brutal, unyielding military regime under the COG. The strain of this sudden, monumental weight was too much for Chairman Thomas Dalyell. Less than a year after the emergence, his heart gave out under the immense pressure of a collapsing species, paving the way for the rise of Richard Prescott. Prescott was a leader forged in the cold calculus of survival, a man who looked at the data of E-Day and realized that normal military tactics were completely obsolete against an enemy that attacked from below. The failures of that first day directly birthed the most horrific government policy in human history, the Fortification Act. Prescott realized that if the humans could not defend their cities, they would have to destroy them. Just 1 year after the invasion, the remaining population was given a mere 3 days to abandon their ancestral homes and retreat to the granite safety of the Jacinto Plateau. When the 3 days expired, the skies ignited. The COG deployed the Hammer of Dawn, raining orbital laser fire down upon their own pristine cities, their own libraries, and their own farmlands, burning everything to ash just to deny resources to the advancing horde. Millions of left-behind civilians were vaporized by their own government. It was a direct, devastating echo of the trauma that began on E-Day. Was it a victory if the price of stopping the enemy was the destruction of your own home? The military mindset of humanity was altered for generations. The Lancer Mk1, with its pristine steel bayonet, became a relic of a naive past. The human soldiers, the gears, learned to become as cold and unyielding as the granite they defended. They stopped fighting for glory, stopped fighting for nations, and began fighting for inches of dirt, knowing that the enemy was always waiting right beneath their boots. Even the architecture of Sera changed. The beautiful, towering silver spires and glass plazas were replaced by heavy, brutalist concrete bunkers and massive fortified walls. Humanity retreated into the stone, mimicking the very creatures that had driven them from the light. Deep below, in the suffocating darkness of the hollow, Queen Mira watched the surface burn. Her children had claimed the human world, but the cost had been absolute. The war she had launched to escape the mutating plague of lambency had now trapped both species in a mutual embrace of death, an endless cycle of hatred that would consume Sera for the next 17 years. Emergence Day was not just the start of a war. It was the day Sera became a tomb, a dark, haunted world where the living envied the dead, and the ground beneath your feet could never, ever be trusted again. Thank you very much for making it to the end of this video. If you enjoyed the story, I invite you to subscribe, leave a like, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of the videos I upload. Also, let me know in the comments how excited you are about the release of the next Gears of War game. Thank you so much for watching the video. Take care and sweet dreams.